In 1216, England was in the throes of intense internal strife as civil wars broke out between King John and his enemies. With increasing pressure from rebellious barons and growing support from France, the Battle of Stingray was one of the decisive battles in this conflict. Here, a page of history is written that testifies to the bravery of the warriors and the magnitude of the suffering. Under an ominous sky, the troops loyal to King John gathered, the voices of the soldiers rising in excitement. Flags waved in the air, and cheers rose in preparation for battle. Every fighter knew that the battle could decide the fate of the kingdom. The rebellious barons poured in from all directions, like a torrent of anger. Their ranks were carefully formed, and the atmosphere began to tense. Eyes stared at each other, reflecting determination and resolve. The leaders gathered to plan their strategies, in a scene that showed tension. They exchanged opinions and ideas enthusiastically, trying to avoid the mistakes that had led to previous defeats. The anxiety was evident, but the enthusiasm was stronger. With the drums beating, the battle suddenly broke out. The battle cries overwhelmed everything, and the aura of calm that had prevailed was shattered. The soldiers rushed towards each other, like hungry lions fighting for survival. The loyalist forces advanced, but faced fierce resistance. Swords were exchanged, shells flew, and cries of pain filled the air. Each fighter felt the weight of the battle on his shoulders, but there was no room for retreat. In the middle of the battle, one of the warriors found himself surrounded by a number of enemies, but instead of surrendering, he gathered his courage and showed prowess in combat. Cries of victory resounded in the air, causing morale to rise. The commander of the loyalist forces saw the right opportunity. He ordered a change of formation, and they advanced suddenly, confusing the enemy. It was an exciting moment, as the barons began to feel anxious, causing them to retreat a little. As sunset approached, King John led a powerful attack. It was as if the ground shook under the soldiers' feet, and the terrible sound of swords intermingled with the cries of war. This was an unforgettable moment in the history of the battle. Everyone witnessed the heroic stance of a knight who faced several enemies alone. The fighting was fierce, but his determination was stronger. At that moment, everyone realized that courage could be an invincible weapon. Thanks to that courage, the enemy ranks began to crack. The battle was raging, and the atmosphere was full of tension and excitement. The ground moved under the soldiers' feet, as if reflecting their internal struggles. As night fell, the battle began to fade away. Silence fell on the battlefield, as the corpses of soldiers seemed to tell the story of the tragedies they had witnessed. But in the distance, the voices were resounding with victory. The loyalist forces returned to their villages, victorious, but the wounds of the battle remained deep. Everyone had witnessed a battle that was not just bloody, but symbolic of struggle and loyalty. The Battle of Stingray is over, but its impact remains in the memory of England. It is known as one of the defining moments that shaped the future of the country. This battle was an embodiment of courage and resistance, and a reminder that war is not just a battle, but a human experience that reflects the deepest aspects of the human spirit. In 1461, England was in the throes of a bloody conflict between the York and Lancaster families, with political differences embodied in bloody conflicts, known as the War of the Roses. In this context, the Battle of Towton took place, which became a symbol of the bitter struggle between the two families. This battle played a decisive role in determining the fate of the English throne, as the clashes erupted in an atmosphere charged with emotions and tragedies. On the morning of the battle, the York troops gathered under the banner of King Edward IV, while the Lancaster troops stood waiting for the battle. The flags were fluttering in the air, and the atmosphere was filled with anxiety and anticipation. The soldiers exchanged looks filled with determination and readiness, each of them knowing that the battle would change the course of history. Despite the pressures of the battle, the York leaders showed deep enthusiasm and readiness to defend their rights. The leaders gathered in a small tent where they devised a complex plan. Their voices were rising, their thoughts were flowing, their eyes were focused on achieving victory. With the drums beating, the battle broke out suddenly. The troops rushed towards each other, swords clashing, and horses trampling the ground in a terrifying roar. The screams of the men rose, and the moment was pulsating with excitement and fear. The soldiers exchanged blows in a bitter struggle, and the sounds of swords clashing were heard everywhere. Armors glistened in the sun, and blood flowed on the ground, expressing unspeakable horrors. The battle was a scene of chaos and horror. In the midst of the chaos, one knight stood bravely. He fought like a tiger, facing the enemy fearlessly, and his determination inspired those around him. His screams urged his comrades forward, and with each blow he dealt, he restored hope to their souls. Thanks to strategic planning, the York commanders were able to use the terrain to their advantage. The troops moved in unison, like a snake coiling around its prey, confusing the Lancastrian ranks. Those moments were filled with tension as victory loomed. As the battle intensified, the situation began to change. The Lancastrian ranks disintegrated under the pressure of York's organized attack. The atmosphere was charged with tension as the soldiers began to feel despair, causing some to retreat at a critical moment. As the Lancastrian forces retreated, the dominant sound was that of victory. York's victory was announced, and the soldiers celebrated with cries of joy. It was a historic moment as everyone realized that the battle had been decided, but the price had been high. Amidst the joy, there were also moments of sadness. Many lives were lost, and tears were streaming down faces. Everyone realized that victory had come at the cost of lives, and that war leaves only destructive scars. As the battle ended, the victorious troops began to return to their villages. In 1471, England was going through a difficult time during the War of the Roses, as the Lancastrian and Yorkist families were fighting for control of the throne. The Battle of Tewkesbury took place on May 4th, and was one of the decisive battles that affected the course of the war. King Edward IV led the Yorkist army against the Lancastrian forces, and the battle resulted in a crushing victory for the Yorkists, which changed the course of events in the kingdom. Before the battle, the atmosphere in the Yorkist camp reflected a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The soldiers gathered under the banner of King Edward IV, who was determined to restore his power after his return from exile. The flags were flying, and the voices of the soldiers were rising as they began to prepare themselves for battle. On the other side, the Lancastrian forces under the command of Edmund, Earl of Richmond, were preparing for battle. They felt confident because of the large number of soldiers, and they were gathered around influential leaders who symbolized their legacy. The atmosphere was tense, as everyone expected the battle to be decisive. As dawn broke, the battle began. The Lancastrian soldiers advanced boldly, trying to advance towards the Yorkist lines. The sound of swords rose, and battle cries filled the air. The shields glistened in the sun, reflecting the ferocity of the battle. Both sides traded blows fiercely, as fighting raged at every corner. Bodies clashed, and the ground was covered in blood. Amidst the chaos, there were many heroic moments as the soldiers showed incredible courage in the face of death. King Edward took advantage of his military experience as he skillfully managed the battle. He used the terrain to his advantage and focused on the weak points in the enemy's ranks. These moments reflected his strategic intelligence as the situation began to change in York's favor. As the battle continued, a sudden shift occurred. York's forces were ordered to launch a powerful attack on the Lancastrian flank, causing their ranks to collapse. The atmosphere was tense as the Lancastrians began to feel hopeless and anxious. The Lancastrians began to retreat, while cries of joy rose from the Yorkist ranks. The battle was in chaos, with some soldiers trying to flee, while others continued to fight. This was a decisive turning point, as York's victory was confirmed. Amidst the chaos, Edmund, Earl of Richmond, was captured by York's forces. This event had a huge psychological impact on the Lancastrian soldiers, as they realized that the battle was truly over. It was a painful moment that represented their failure. As the battle came to an end, celebrations broke out in York's camp. Cries of joy filled the air as the soldiers felt proud of their victory. But beneath all this joy, there was also a sense of sadness at the loss of life in the battle. The Battle of Tewkesbury had a profound impact on the course of the War of the Roses. The York victory helped to assert their control over the English throne and led to a long period of decline for the Lancastrians. It was the beginning of a new phase in English history. Both sides learned important lessons from the battle. The Lancastrians realized that numerical strength alone was not enough, while the Yorkist forces demonstrated that strategic planning and strong leadership could lead to victory. The Battle of Tewkesbury has become a symbol of heroism and victory. It is remembered in history as one of the decisive battles that shaped the future of England. The moments of courage and sacrifice will be told through the generations as a lesson in the willpower and determination of the people. The Battle of Tewkesbury is over, but it has left a clear mark on English history. It was an embodiment of the human struggle for power, proving that victory comes at the cost of sacrifice. On August 22, 1485, England witnessed one of the most decisive battles in its history, the Battle of Bosworth. This battle marked the effective end of the War of the Roses, a bloody conflict that had lasted for decades between the houses of York and Lancaster. Henry Tudor, representing the House of Lancaster, led his forces against King Richard III, King of York. Bosworth was a turning point in English history, determining the fate of the throne and laying the foundations for the Tudor era. Before the battle, the atmosphere in King Richard III's camp was tense and confident. The soldiers wore their gilded armor and raised brightly colored flags. King Richard, who was known for his bravery, spoke to his troops, assuring them that they were fighting for their king and their family. On the other side, Henry Tudor's troops were gathering in a state of enthusiasm and determination. Henry, who claimed his right to the throne, hoped to end the harsh rule of Richard III. His soldiers cheered as they prepared their weapons, ready to face the enemy. As the sun rose, the battle was announced. The two armies advanced towards each other, the sounds of drums and shouts rising in the air. With the first clash, swords clashed and blood flowed on the ground, in a scene that reflected the ferocity of the conflict. The battle continued unabated as swords were crossed and archers fired their arrows intensively. Fighting was raging at every corner, with scenes of bravery and sacrifice as soldiers bravely faced death. Armor glistened in the sunlight, while blood splattered everywhere. Thanks to his experience, Henry Tudor used innovative tactics. He used the terrain of the area to his advantage, as some of his soldiers retreated to fortified positions. As Richard continued to attack, things were slowly changing. As the battle progressed, things began to turn in Henry's favor. He managed to attract some of Richard's soldiers to his side, which increased the pressure on the king. The moment was decisive, as the fate of the battle was in hand. In a poignant scene, Henry Tudor faced King Richard III. Screams rang out as they fought in a personal battle that embodied the Game of Thrones. At a pivotal moment, Henry managed to wound Richard, causing York's army to collapse. With Richard dead, York's forces began to collapse. Chaos reigned on the battlefield as soldiers tried to flee. This marked the end of Richard III's reign and the end of the conflict that had torn England apart. After the battle, celebrations broke out in Henry Tudor's camp. Joy was widespread as the new king was welcomed. It was a historic moment as his dream of regaining the throne for England came true. The Battle of Bosworth Field had a profound impact on the history of England. It ended the War of the Roses, a established the Tudors, and ushered in a period of relative stability. Bosworth marked the beginning of a new era, with Henry VII being remembered as a unifying monarch. England learned a great deal from this battle. Everyone realized that power struggles can lead to chaos, and that unity is the path to stability. Bosworth was a lesson in the importance of sacrifice and courage. The Battle of Bosworth became a symbol of change. It is remembered as one of the defining moments that shaped the future of England. Stories of courage and sacrifice are told through the generations, serving as a constant reminder of the importance of history. The Battle of Bosworth is over, but its effects live on in the memory of the nation. It was an embodiment of the human struggle for control, proving that a strong will can change the course of events. Ultimately, Bosworth was a testament to hope and a sign of a new era in English history. In 1482, relations between England and Scotland were fraught with tension and hostility. The Battle of Banbridge took place on April 28, one of the most important military confrontations between English and Scottish forces. This battle was not just a struggle for territory, but an expression of national identity and the long-standing conflict between the two countries. In the English camp, the atmosphere reflected excitement, mixed with anxiety. The leaders gathered under the banner of King Edward IV, where plans and strategies were made. Weapons were sharpened, flags were raised, and all the eyes of the soldiers were turned north, where the enemy awaited them. In contrast, the Scottish forces under Douglas were gathering at Banbridge. The atmosphere reflected determination and resolve, as the soldiers were ready to defend their land. The Scottish flags danced in the wind, declaring their loyalty to the country. As the sun rose, the battle began. English soldiers advanced towards the Scottish lines, swords crossing. War cries filled the air as the battle broke out suddenly, leaving behind the smell of blood and gunpowder. Both sides traded blows bravely, with the English forces seeking control while the Scots tried to defend their territory. The conflict was fierce, with each sword strike reflecting the fate of the battle. Armor gleamed in the sun, while blood dripped on the ground. Despite the English numerical superiority, the Scottish commanders showed skill in using the terrain to their advantage. Innovative tactics were implemented to delay the English advance. These were tense moments as each side sought to control the course of the battle. In the midst of the battle, there were many heroic moments. One Scottish soldier, considered a local hero, braved danger and faced a group of Englishmen single-handedly. His courage inspired his comrades as he continued to fight against all odds. As time passed, the battle began to take a new turn. The Scottish forces put up a strong resistance, confusing the English. The pressure on the English forces began to increase, and signs of anxiety appeared in their ranks. Thanks to their courage and effective tactics, the English ranks began to disintegrate. The Scots seized the opportunity and rushed forward, causing the English camp to collapse. This was a decisive moment, as their victories in the battle were confirmed. As the battle ended, the victory was on the Scottish side. Celebrations began to spread throughout the place, as the soldiers shouted patriotic songs and chants. It was a historic moment, as the Scots regained their resolve. The Battle of Banbridge was a sign of Scottish resistance to English occupation. It profoundly affected relations between the two countries, increasing the intensity of the conflict and deepening the gap between them. The battle was a reminder that the desire for freedom cannot be easily broken. Each side learned important lessons from the battle. The English understood the importance of planning and relying on numbers alone, while the Scots grew in national pride. This battle was a turning point in the history of the conflict between the two countries. Over time, the Battle of Banbridge has become a symbol of national courage. It is remembered in books as one of the most important battles that shaped Scottish history. It embodied the belief of the Scottish people in their ability to defend their land and identity. The Battle of Banbridge is over, but its effects live on in the memory of history. It was an embodiment of the human struggle for freedom, proving that strength and determination can overcome challenges. On August 26, 1346, England experienced one of its greatest victories in the Hundred Years' War at the Battle of Crecy. The battle took place between English forces led by King Edward III and French forces led by King Philip VI. Crecy became a symbol of strategic valor and military strength, as the English demonstrated their prowess in the use of archers and achieved a crushing victory against a superior enemy. Before the battle, the atmosphere in King Edward III's camp was charged with enthusiasm and confidence. The soldiers gathered under the English banner, wearing their shining armor. There were hints of anxiety, but Edward reassured them that they would fight for honor and dignity. On the other side, French forces were assembling under King Philip VI. The French army was outnumbered, which gave their commanders a sense of confidence. But they did not realize that the terrain and English tactics would present a major challenge. As the sun rose, the battle began. The French advanced boldly, while the English archers launched their massive attacks. The sounds of drums and war cries filled the air as the soldiers clashed in a fierce battle. The two sides exchanged blows in a fierce fight. While the ground was covered in blood, the soldiers displayed extraordinary courage. Fighting was taking place at every corner, swords were crossing, and cries were heard everywhere. The English took advantage of the skills of the archers, as they fired their arrows heavily towards the French forces. The arrows were falling like rain, resulting in heavy casualties among the French. The chaos in the French camp increased, affecting the morale of the soldiers. As the battle progressed, King Edward displayed strategic brilliance. He used the surrounding terrain to his advantage, as he had his soldiers stand in fortified positions. These moments reflected his intelligence as a military leader, which contributed to increasing the pressure on the French forces. As the battle raged, King Philip faced the critical situation. He tried to organize his army, but things were getting out of control. The increasing losses led to a sense of frustration and anxiety among the French soldiers. As the pressure increased, the French army began to disintegrate. The English were able to exploit the chaos and launch a powerful attack, which led to the collapse of the French army. This was a decisive moment, as the English victory was confirmed. As the battle ended, celebrations erupted in the English camp. Screams of joy and dignity filled the air as the soldiers celebrated their great victory. This was a historic moment, as Edward achieved a great victory in the history of his country. The Battle of Crecy profoundly affected the course of the Hundred Years' War. The English victory helped strengthen their position in the conflict and demonstrated the new military power they possessed. Crecy was a turning point in the history of the war. Each side learned important lessons from the battle. The French realized that numerical superiority was not enough, while the English demonstrated that strategic planning and the use of technology could lead to victory. Crecy was a lesson in the importance of good preparation. The Battle of Crecy became a symbol of heroism and courage. It is remembered in history as one of the decisive battles that shaped the future of England. Stories of bravery and sacrifice continue to be told through the generations, serving as a constant reminder of the power of will and determination. The Battle of Crecy is over, but its effects live on in the memory of the nation. It was an embodiment of the human struggle for control, proving that courage and planning could overcome numerical superiority. Ultimately, Crecy was a testament to hope and a sign of a new era of English national pride. On May 22, 1455, England witnessed the beginning of one of the most turbulent periods in its history, when the Battle of Blore Heath took place. This battle was the prelude to the War of the Roses, the struggle between the houses of York and Lancaster for the English throne. Richard, Duke of York, led the forces opposing King Henry VI of the House of Lancaster. Blore Heath was a pivotal moment, revealing the deep political and social tensions in the country. Before the battle, The atmosphere in York's camp was charged with excitement and anticipation. The soldiers gathered, with Richard, Duke of York, standing at the front of the ranks, ready to face the king. The faces reflected determination, as everyone knew that this battle would determine the fate of the country. On the other side, King Henry VI's forces were gathering under the king's banner. The atmosphere was one of confidence, as the king believed that he was supported by his nobles and leaders. However, there was an underlying concern among the soldiers about their fate in the face of York's trained army. As the sun rose, the battle began. The cries of war were raised, and the two armies rushed towards each other. The ground trembled beneath the soldiers' feet as swords crossed in fierce fighting. The Battle of Blore Heath was more than just a military conflict, as it embodied the deep divisions between the two families. The battle continued fiercely, with blood flowing on the ground. Each side sought to dominate, with exceptional bravery evident in the ranks of the soldiers. This battle was considered the beginning of a new era of conflict, as the signs indicated that the conflict would not end easily. Richard, Duke of York, made good use of his military experience. He used the surrounding terrain to his advantage and led his forces with skill. His tactics proved effective, allowing his army to advance in some parts of the battlefield. Amidst the chaos, the battle witnessed heroic moments. Soldiers on both sides fought with unparalleled bravery, willing to sacrifice their lives for the honor of their families. These moments were a reminder of how important this conflict was to each side. As time passed, the tide began to turn in York's favor. His forces were able to exploit the chaos within the Lancastrian ranks as pressure began to build on them. This was a turning point, as the balance of power began to shift towards York. As the pressure mounted, the Lancastrian army began to retreat. The atmosphere was one of frustration and anxiety as the soldiers tried to flee the battlefield. This moment signaled the beginning of the end for King Henry VI. As the battle ended, celebrations erupted in York's camp. Shouts of joy rose as the soldiers celebrated their first victory. This was a historic moment, as it marked the start of the War of the Roses, which would continue for many years. The Battle of Blore Heath had a profound impact on the course of the War of the Roses. York's victory demonstrated that the conflict was no longer just a family feud, but an ongoing struggle for power. This victory was a huge boost for the Duke of York and his family. In 1642, England was living through turbulent times in the midst of the English Civil Wars, where violent conflicts broke out between the Royalists, who supported King Charles I, and the Parliamentarians, who opposed his absolute rule. On September 28th of the same year, the Battle of the Severn took place, which was one of the most prominent battles of this conflict. This battle witnessed fierce clashes, as both sides tried to control the course of events. Before the battle, the atmosphere in the Royalist camp reflected a mixture of excitement and anxiety. The soldiers gathered around King Charles I, who was trying to inspire his troops with promises of victory and regaining control of the country. The Royalist flags were flying, and voices were raised in their calls to fight. On the other side, the Parliamentarians were preparing their troops under the command of Sir William Wingfield. The atmosphere was tense, as they were aware that the battle could determine their fate. The troops gathered with hearts full of determination, hoping to achieve victory against the Royalists. As the sun rose, the battle was announced. The two armies rushed toward each other, and voices were raised with screams and drums. The sounds of swords and firearms resounded on the battlefield, as everyone witnessed the outbreak of fierce fighting. The fighting continued with brutality, as both sides exchanged blows. Blood was flowing on the ground, while bodies were falling. The soldiers showed incredible courage, as each side fought fiercely to defend its cause. The Royalists took advantage of their military tactics as they tried to organize their ranks despite the chaos. Meanwhile, the Parliamentarians used an unconventional approach as they rushed to attack the weaker sides of the royalist ranks. These moments reflected the dedication of both sides. As the battle progressed, there were decisive moments when the balance of power changed. The parliamentarians managed to break one of the royalist defense lines, shocking the royalist ranks. This was the point at which things were beginning to turn in the parliamentarians' favor. The royalist forces began to retreat under increasing pressure from the parliamentarians. Despair was creeping into the soldiers' hearts as they realized that things were getting worse. However, some of them tried to resist bravely, but chaos reigned among their ranks. As the battle ended, the parliamentarians celebrated their victory. There were shouts of joy as they welcomed their success as a sign of the strength of their cause. It was a historic moment, as the parliamentarians had made significant progress in their war against the royalists. The Battle of the Severn had a profound effect on the course of the English Civil Wars. It boosted parliamentarian morale and demonstrated the royalists' vulnerability to challenges. It was the beginning of a series of battles that would shape the future of England. Both sides learned important lessons from the battle. The royalists realized that they could not rely on numbers alone, while the parliamentarians demonstrated that good planning and organization could lead to victory. The Severn was a lesson in the importance of preparation and adaptability. The Battle of the Severn has become a symbol of the struggle for power. It is remembered in history as one of the battles that helped change the course of the Civil Wars. Stories of bravery and sacrifice are still told, serving as a constant reminder of the challenges the country faced. The Battle of the Severn is over, but it was only one chapter in a long struggle. It was an embodiment of the human struggle for control, proving that will and determination can overcome adversity. In the end, the Severn was a testament to hope and determination, and marked the beginning of a new era in English history. The Battle of Naseby, which took place in 1645, is considered one of the decisive moments in the English Civil Wars, marking a major turning point in the conflict between King Charles I and the supporters of Parliament. This battle witnessed a mixture of complex military strategies, epic confrontations, and unexpected betrayals, adding to the dramatic nature of its events. In this narrative, we shall review scenes that reflect the charged atmosphere and tensions surrounding this historic battle. Under a cloudy sky, the forces of Parliament gathered in a narrow valley. Flags fluttered in the breeze, and the voices of the soldiers mixed with the cries of the commanders. Their anticipation was palpable. Everyone knew that a pivotal battle was imminent. The military leaders convened around an outdated map, exchanging ideas and drafting plans. Military innovations were taking shape, but the ominous specter of betrayal loomed large. In their tent, soldiers prepared for the coming conflict. Whispers of hope and anxiety permeated the air as they donned their armor and sharpened their weapons. As King Charles's army approached, confusion spread like wildfire. Smoke began to rise in the distance, and the soldiers' hearts pounded with trepidation. Could they withstand the might of the royal forces? Archers were positioned on the front lines, releasing arrow after arrow, each one cutting through the sky like a swift bird. Bodies fell in rhythmic succession, and the tempo of the fighting escalated. Fierce clashes broke out between knights on the battlefield. The neighing of horses and the sound of iron striking iron created a chaotic symphony of battle. Leaders from both sides emerged, each seeking to prove their bravery. The duels between these heroes were intense, as weapons shattered and blood splattered. After an hour of relentless fighting, the ranks of the parliamentary army began to falter. The losses were substantial, and hope started to wane. Could they endure the king's onslaught? A group of valiant soldiers intervened at the last moment, restoring balance to the battle. Morale surged anew, and hopes for victory were rekindled. A clever commander executed a brilliant maneuver, throwing the enemy into disarray. Parliamentary soldiers seized the opportunity and struck with newfound vigor. As the sun began to set, the battle reached its peak intensity. Shadows cast by the dying light stretched over the fallen bodies, amplifying the drama of the scene. The battle was finally over, but victory came at a heavy cost. Many heroes had fallen, and sorrow gripped the hearts of the survivors. It was a bittersweet moment, a hard-won triumph laced with grief. The Battle of Naseby was not merely a military conflict, but a test of loyalties and wills. It left an indelible impact on English history, significantly influencing the course of the Civil Wars. The lessons gleaned from this battle continued to shape the nation's political and social landscape, serving as a lasting reminder of the power and consequences of war. The Battle of Marston Moor, which took place in 1644, is considered one of the decisive battles of the English Civil Wars. This battle was a confrontation between the army of King Charles I and the army of Parliament, and it played a major role in determining the outcome of the conflict. The battle was characterized by complex strategies, the amazing bravery of the soldiers, and the surprising moments that added suspense to its events. Below, we will review the scenes full of excitement that shed light on the events of this historic battle. On the morning of the battle, the troops gathered on the field of Marston Moor. Flags fluttered and the soldiers exchanged conversations, while signs of tension were evident on their faces. In their tent, the military leaders were putting the finishing touches to their plans. The carefully drawn map was in the middle, while the sounds of shouts and orders rose. The neighing of horses echoed in the distance, and King Charles's forces began to approach. Fear and anxiety prevailed among the soldiers, who were anticipating a fierce battle. With the first battle cries, the troops rushed towards each other like waves. Arrows flew like a storm, and soldiers fell in all directions. On the front line, the knights fought fiercely. Horses neighed, swords clashed, and every blow carried the threat of death. As the battle raged, some soldiers whispered about new strategies. The lines were quickly reformed as commanders began directing troops towards weak points in the enemy's ranks.